She was gone before I knew she was leaving. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the phone calls that went unanswered, not the message from the number I didn't recognize, not even sitting across from a federal investigator in my own classroom while my Year 11 annotations were still on the whiteboard behind him. I keep coming back to the fact that she was already in the process of leaving while we were sitting at the corner table in October, and I was talking about a student who was struggling with metaphor, and she was listening the way she always listened. Like what I was saying was the most important thing currently happening, and she was already gone. The Claire I knew was already closing. I just hadn't seen the door. 3 weeks after I found all this out, I was sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Tuesday. Second row, left side, near the cart return. Our spot, in the loose way that two people develop spots without ever discussing them. Claire said once that walking the cart back was the only exercise she got all week, and I laughed at this, even though she said it every time, even though it was the same joke every single Saturday, because it was her joke, and it made her laugh at herself when she said it, and that was enough for me. I had been sitting there for 19 minutes. I had reached for the door handle 4 times. Each time I had pulled my hand back before I touched it. The grocery store looked the same as it always had. The cart return was where it always was. The light above the entrance did that same flicker on the right side that it has been doing for 2 years and that nobody has gotten around to fixing. Everything was exactly as it was on every other Tuesday and Saturday, and whatever day I needed something and came here without thinking about it. The parking lot had not changed. The world had not changed. My best friend of 12 years does not exist in any database under the name I know her by, and I was sitting in our spot with my hand in my lap instead of on the door handle, trying to work out if that changes what those 12 years were. I haven't worked it out. I'm still working it out. But I want to tell you how it started, because the starting was so quiet I almost missed it, and I think that's the part that matters most. 14 years ago I moved to this city for a job and stayed because it turned out to be the right city for me. I've lived in the same neighborhood for 12 of those 14 years. I know the coffee shop on Marsh Street well enough that the staff know my order without me giving it. I teach English at a secondary school 8 minutes from my flat, and I have been teaching there for 10 years, and I am very good at it. I say this not to brag, but because it's relevant. My job is paying attention to what people say and what they mean and the distance between those two things. I teach my students to read closely, to notice what's absent as much as what's present, to understand that every text is doing more than one thing at once. I have been doing this for a decade. I missed it for 12 years. I want to be honest about that. Claire and I met in February 12 years ago, in the coffee shop on Marsh Street. I had been going there every Saturday for 2 years. She had apparently been going there for 3 weeks, and I had never noticed her, which is embarrassing, but also, that corner table by the window, second from the left, I wasn't looking at who else was there. I was marking papers. She asked if she could sit across from me because the cafe was full that morning, some Valentine's Day thing I'd forgotten about, and I said yes without looking up, and she sat down and didn't try to talk to me for 40 minutes, which I respected enormously. When I finally looked up, she was reading a novel I'd taught the year before. I said something about it. I forget exactly what, some observation about the ending, and she had a specific, thoughtful response. Not a conversational response, a considered one. Like she'd been thinking about the book's ending and had her own conclusion and was willing to talk about it. We talked for an hour. She was back the next Saturday, same table. I was there first. We talked for 2 hours. The third Saturday, I arrived and ordered 2 lattes without thinking about it. Oat latte with an extra shot for me, oat latte without for her. And when she arrived and found her coffee waiting, she looked at it for a second and then looked at me and said, "You didn't have to do that." And I said, "I was getting mine anyway." And she said, "Thank you." That was the beginning. 6 years of Saturdays. Same table, same order. I always arrived first. She was always 8 to 12 minutes late, always apologetic, always carrying something. A jacket she'd forgotten in the car, a library book she was returning, once a small succulent in a terracotta pot she was taking to a colleague. I knew the rhythm of her arrival the way you learn someone's habits over years, until their habits become part of the furniture of your life. At some point, I can't tell you exactly when, we started meeting on days that weren't Saturday too. Weeknight dinners, occasional films, The kind of slow walk that covers 8 kilometers without either of you noticing because you're talking the whole time. She came to my school's end-of-year performance 2 years running because I mentioned it and she wanted to come. I held her hand at her grandmother's funeral, which was the first family event she ever included me in, and the last. She said her family situation was complicated. I accepted this. I accepted a lot of things. I accepted them because they seemed like things a private person who'd had a hard life would reasonably want to keep to herself, and because I trusted her, and because 12 years of evidence had taught me that she was the most reliably present person I had ever known, and I was not going to interrogate that. I'm a person who gives people the benefit of the doubt. I've been doing it my whole life. I've been giving it to Claire since the third Saturday, when I ordered her latte without asking. I'm very good at it. The thing about being very good at something is that you can keep doing it past the point where you should probably stop. Let me tell you about October. It was a Saturday morning, 6 months before everything changed. I arrived at the coffee shop first, as usual, ordered both lattes, took the corner table. 11 minutes later, slightly later than usual, which I registered and forgot, Claire arrived with a library book and no jacket, even though it was properly cold, and she sat down, and she took her latte, and she asked me how my week had been. I told her about a Year 9 student who was struggling with the concept of unreliable narrators, and a lesson on dramatic irony that had gone better than I'd planned, and a conversation with a colleague that left me irritated in a way I couldn't fully articulate. She listened the way she always listened, completely. Not half present, not waiting for her turn, actually genuinely there. At some point I went to the bathroom. It's a small cafe. The bathroom is down a narrow hallway past the kitchen, and when you come back out you have a clear sight line to the corner table before whoever's sitting there can see you. I came back out and I looked at the table, and Claire was looking out the window. Not at anything I could identify, just out. Her coffee was in front of her, both hands around it, and her expression was something I had not seen before, or had seen before and hadn't registered. I'm still not sure. Distant isn't quite right. Private. Like a person whose thoughts had gone somewhere the room couldn't follow. When I sat down, she came back. She said, "Sorry, miles away." And I said, "Anywhere good?" And she smiled. Not her usual smile, something smaller. And she said, "Not particularly." And then we moved on. I told her the rest of the irritating colleague story, and she had a useful observation about it. And we stayed for another hour and walked out together, and she gave me a hug goodbye at the corner. And that was Saturday in October. I think about that expression now, the one she had when she didn't know I was looking. I've been thinking about what she might have been looking at out that window, what she might have been thinking about, whether someone she'd seen on the street had scared her, or whether she'd gotten news, or whether it was just one of those moments when everything you're carrying becomes briefly too heavy and you have to put it down somewhere for a minute. I don't know. I'll probably never know. But I remember it now with a clarity I don't have for most of my memories. And I think it was probably there in other moments too, that particular expression, and I just hadn't caught it in a way that registered. She was always carrying something. I thought it was the ordinary weight people carry. I know now it was more specific than that. The message arrived on a Tuesday evening. I was on my sofa marking essays, phone face down on the cushion next to me. I always work better if I can't see the screen. And when I flipped it over at 9 o'clock to check the time, there was a text from a number I didn't have saved. 9 words. "I'm sorry I can't explain. I'm sorry for everything. Please don't look for me." I read it 3 times. I sat with it for a moment. Then I called the number. Out of service. Immediate. Like the number had never existed. I tried Claire's regular number. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I listened to her recorded voice, the specific flatness she always had on recorded messages, slightly too formal, a version of herself she seemed uncomfortable with, and I hung up without leaving a message. I tried again. Same thing. I sent a text. "What's happening? Are you okay? Please call me." I watched the 2 ticks, both gray, not delivered. The thing is, in the first few hours, I was worried, but I believed the message. Not the not explaining, but the sincerity of it, the sorry. I know how Claire apologizes. She apologizes fully, directly, without qualification. She never says, "I'm sorry if that upset you." She says, "I'm sorry." That message sounded like her. The sorry sounded like her. So I did the thing I've been doing for 12 years. I gave her the interpretation that assumed the best. She was in something she couldn't explain yet. She was safe but unreachable. She would explain when she could. I told myself this and I went to bed, and I didn't sleep well, but I did sleep. In the morning I went to work. Teaching 6 hours a day is the thing that keeps you functional when you would otherwise not be functional. Because the work requires your full presence. You cannot be inside your own head when there are 30 teenagers in front of you expecting something. So I taught. I marked. I had a conversation with a colleague about a year 10 student we were both worried about. I drove home. I tried Claire's number again. Voicemail. Gray ticks. This was day 1. Days 2 and 3 were the same. Day 4, I called her employer. Not because I thought anything in particular. I told myself it was in case no one had called, in case she needed emergency personal leave and hadn't had the chance to arrange it. The HR person looked up the record and told me Claire had submitted her resignation 2 weeks ago. Effective immediately. No notice period, no explanation given. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we were at the corner table, and she was listening to me talk about the irritating colleague situation. 2 weeks ago, she was asking follow-up questions about my year 9 student and the unreliable narrator unit. 2 weeks ago, she was carrying her coffee in both hands and smiling, and she was already resigned. She was already gone. She was already, in every way that mattered, somewhere else. I said thank you to the HR person, and I sat in my car in the school car park on my lunch break, and I said it out loud to the windshield. She resigned 2 weeks ago. I said it twice. My voice sounded completely steady. That surprised me. My voice sounded like I was relaying information that didn't particularly much matter, like I was reading out a weather report, and I sat there listening to my own steadiness, and something about it frightened me more than if I'd been crying. She had that job for 4 years. She talked about it the way people talk about a job they found their way into rather than planned for. She'd landed there by accident, stayed because she was good at it and they were good to her, built something. She was working on a project she'd told me about in September, a branding project she was genuinely excited about. I'd heard the specific, engaged quality in her voice when she talked about it, the way her language became more precise. She knew in September she would never finish that project. She never mentioned leaving. She never mentioned any of it. I've been going back through everything she never mentioned, and the list is longer than I want it to be. Day 8. The plants needed water. She'd mentioned it in a message from 2 weeks before everything changed. If you're around, the plants need water while I'm away. You know the schedule. She'd been going away for 4 days to visit a friend, she said, and could I check in on them? I had the key. I'd had it for 4 years. I'd used it maybe 50 times. Watering plants, dropping off food, once collecting a book she needed urgently and couldn't come home for. I knew the code for the building door, and the key to the flat, and the watering schedule, and the names of all 7 plants. She introduced me to the plants the first time I came to the apartment, 4 years ago, formally. "This is Gerald," she said, pointing at a large monstera in the corner. "Gerald has opinions." I thought she was joking. She was not joking, and also she was absolutely joking, and those 2 things were equally true of Claire in a way that I found endlessly appealing. She named them all. Gerald, Mira, the 3 small cacti collectively known as the committee, a spider plant called Sandra, and a trailing pothos she called Brian, because, she said, he just seemed like a Brian. I watered them in order. I knew their names the way I knew her coffee order, and the rhythm of her Saturday arrivals. This is what 12 years looks like. I let myself into the apartment. It looked normal. The furniture was in its place, the photographs were on the wall above the desk in the corner, her grid of photos, which I had looked at hundreds of times over 4 years. People she knew, places she'd been, a few I recognized as friends, and many I didn't. Gerald was in his corner. The committee were on the windowsill. Sandra was trailing over the edge of the bookshelf. Everything in its place. I started with Gerald, because he was first and he needed the most water. Then Mira, then the committee, one at a time. I was working through the order on automatic. I knew the schedule well enough that I didn't need to think about it. And somewhere between Sandra and Brian, I stopped. I stood in the middle of the room and I looked around, and something was wrong in a way I couldn't immediately locate. The laptop was gone. It had always lived on the desk, to the right of the photographs, plugged in. The desk was there, the power cable was not. The external hard drive that sat next to the laptop? Gone. The bag that hung on the hook by the front door? Not her everyday bag, but a larger one, the kind you'd take for a long weekend? Gone. The hook was empty. I went to the bathroom. I don't know exactly why. I wasn't looking for anything, not consciously, but I went. I opened the cabinet under the sink. She had an emergency kit. I saw it once, about 18 months ago, when I was looking for a plaster after catching my hand on a shelf. A clear plastic box with a lid, neatly packed, snapped shut. I'd clocked it briefly and thought, practical, good to have. I should do that. I'd moved on. I hadn't looked at it closely. Now I was standing in her bathroom looking at the empty shelf where it had been. And I was also standing 18 months ago looking at a box I now understood was not casual preparedness. It was a specific, deliberate kit assembled by someone who had thought very carefully about what she would need to leave quickly. I could see it in my memory now with a different kind of attention. The shape of it, the way it was packed. Not a general first aid kit, something assembled with intent. She had that kit ready. She had it ready for 4 years at minimum. That's how long I'd had the key, how long I'd been in and out of that bathroom. And it was there every time until it wasn't. She was always ready to leave, and she never told me. And she named her plants and introduced them to me like people, and made me learn their names, and she knew that one day I'd come in here to water them, and she would be gone. I finished watering all 7 plants, one by one, in order. I used her watering can, which was a green tin one she'd had for as long as I'd known her, with a long, narrow spout for reaching into the back of the shelf. I said their names out loud while I watered them, which I had never done before, and which I did that day without deciding to. Gerald, Mira, the committee, each in turn. Sandra, Brian. Then I sat on her sofa for 45 minutes and did nothing. Then I went home. The investigator came on day 11, not to my flat, to my school. He arrived at 3:45 after the last class of the day and introduced himself at the front desk and was shown to my classroom. I was still there, reorganizing the room after a year 11 session, when he knocked on the open door. He was younger than I expected. He carried a notebook and a takeaway coffee cup. He looked briefly at the whiteboard behind me, still covered in annotations about the novel my year 11 class was working through, with a section on dramatic irony circled twice in red. And his expression was something almost like recognition. He sat in one of the student chairs on the other side of my desk. He set his coffee down. He introduced himself properly and told me his name and showed me his identification and told me that he was part of a federal witness protection coordination unit, and that they were aware that I was a close friend of a woman I knew as Claire, and that they were trying to locate her safely and quickly, and that they would value my cooperation. I said, "Is she in danger?" He said, "Not in immediate danger, not right now." He said it like it was reassuring. It was not reassuring. He opened his notebook. He asked me a few preliminary questions: how long I'd known her, how often we were in contact, whether I'd heard from her recently. I answered carefully. I told him about the message. He wrote down the number it came from, which he told me was a disposable SIM, as I suspected. He asked if I had any other contact information for her. I said I had her regular number, which wasn't connecting, and the number she'd messaged from, which was out of service. He noted both of these things. Then he put his notebook down. He said, "There are some things I can tell you." He said it like he'd thought about how to say it. He took out his phone and opened 2 photographs. The first one, Claire, younger, maybe 10 years younger, so mid-20s, which would have been before I knew her. Different hair, shorter and darker, but her. A photograph that looked like it had been scanned from an identification document. Below the photograph, a name. Not Claire, a name I'd never heard, in a format, first name, middle name, surname, that belonged to a person who was not the person I knew. I looked at the photograph for a long time. I said, "This is Claire." He said, "This is her, yes. That was her name before." Before. Her name before. I turned that over for a moment. The second photograph, a courtroom sketch. A woman in her mid-20s described in the caption as an observed witness. The sketch was rough in the way courtroom sketches always are. Features simplified, expression flattened. But there was something about the profile, the line of her jaw, the way the shoulders sat, a particular angle I'd been looking at for 12 years, that I knew. I would have known it without the caption. I would have known it without the name on the first photograph. I knew her. He asked if I recognized the person in the sketch. Yes, that's her. He nodded. He told me then, carefully and in parts, what had happened. A city I'd never been to. An event she hadn't intended to witness. At a place she hadn't intended to be. At a time when 2 men were present doing something that couldn't be witnessed. She'd seen them. They'd seen her. She ran. One of them followed her for 2 blocks before she lost him in a crowd. She went to the police. She gave a statement. She testified in a preliminary hearing. The men were connected to people with money and organization. Before the trial, someone found out where she lived. She came home to her apartment and her front door was open. She didn't go inside. She called her contact at the prosecution and was relocated within 48 hours. The city I knew her in was her 3rd relocation. Claire was her 2nd identity. The name she was born with, and the one between that and Claire, were things he didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. The original case had been tried without her full testimony. A conviction was secured on other evidence, but a lesser charge than intended, and the primary figure, the one who mattered most, had walked. New evidence had come in that changed the picture. The prosecution needed her. They had found her. Which meant the other side had the same window to find her. 3 weeks ago, 2 men had come to her building and asked the manager about a woman matching her description. The manager told Claire. She was packed and gone in under 2 hours. He said, "She's been trying to keep you out of this." He said it without looking at his notebook, which meant it wasn't information, exactly. It was something else. She left the way she left to keep you at a distance from it. That's who she is. I sat with that. 2 seconds. 3. I said, "That's who she is." Not a question. I know who she is. I have known who she is for 12 years, in the ways that matter. In the ways you know someone through what they do, rather than what they say. And who she is, the person who shows up with 3 kinds of soup because she doesn't know which one you want, so she brings all of them. The person who sits on the phone for 2 hours at the exact moment you need her. The person who learns the names of her plants and makes the people who water them learn the names too. That person made a choice to leave in the way that would cause me the least damage. I know that. I've known it since the message. I'm sorry for everything. That's a 12-year sorry. She couldn't give me more than 9 words, and she used 2 of them to say it twice. He told me he'd need a full statement within 72 hours. He gave me a card. He shook my hand. He left. I stayed in the classroom for a while. The annotations were still on the whiteboard. Dramatic irony. Where the audience knows something, the character doesn't. The circle in red felt, at that moment, like a very particular joke. Okay, stop. I sat at my desk for maybe 10 minutes doing nothing. Then, I did the thing I do when something is too big to hold all at once. I made a list. Not on paper. In my head. Not the facts. He'd given me the facts, and I'd file the facts when I was ready. The list I made was of things I needed to decide. Whether I could reconstruct, in enough useful detail, the shape of Claire's daily life in this city, the routes she walked, the places she went regularly, the habits and rhythms that would help the right people locate her safely. I thought I could. I thought I knew her well enough for that. I thought about what it meant that I knew her that well, while not knowing something as fundamental as her name, and I filed that thought under later, because it was too large for the car park on a Tuesday evening. Whether I would name, in my statement, the other friends Claire had in this city. I know some of them, not well, but enough to identify. I decided, sitting in that empty classroom, that I would not name them. Not because I was withholding cooperation, because I did not know what was relevant and what wasn't, and I was not going to put people into something they might have no part in on the basis of uncertainty. If the investigator pushed, I would reconsider. I didn't think he would push. Whether I was going to tell anyone, my sister, my mother, the colleague I trusted most at work. I sat with this one the longest. I have a sister who has called me twice this week because I've been not quite myself on the phone, and she knows it. I have a mother who is attentive to my moods in the way mothers are attentive to things they've been watching for 34 years. I have a colleague who has known me for 8 years and who said, at lunch 2 days ago, "You seem far away." I said I had things on my mind. She said, "Okay." She didn't push. I'm grateful to her for not pushing. I wasn't going to tell them, not because I was forbidden to, he hadn't said that, but because I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like something that happens in other people's lives, in news stories, not in the life of a secondary school English teacher who marks essays on her sofa and has a standing Saturday morning coffee order. My best friend of 12 years is in witness protection, and I don't know her real name, and federal investigators have come to my classroom. Said out loud to someone who knows me, this sentence would require a kind of recalibration of reality that I wasn't ready to ask anyone to do. I was still doing it myself. And there was the other thing, the thing the investigator had said without saying. The people involved had gathered information before, through peripheral contacts. He said it calmly and moved on. I heard it as, be careful about what you say and to whom, because you don't know who is paying attention and to what end. I am an English teacher. I know how to hear what is not said. I heard this very clearly. So I didn't tell anyone. I went home. I made dinner. Something simple, pasta. The kind of cooking you can do while most of your brain is somewhere else. I made my statement over 2 evenings, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, going through it carefully. Claire's roots, her routines, the coffee shop on Marsh Street, the corner table, the Saturday mornings, the grocery store on Tuesdays, the park she ran in 3 mornings a week, always early, always the same loop, the dry cleaners on the high street that she'd used for years, the library once a fortnight, always returning 1 book and taking 2. I knew all of this. I knew it the way you know someone's geography after 12 years of being in it with them. I wrote it down. I submitted it on the morning of the 3rd day. The investigator replied with a brief acknowledgement. He said there might be follow-up questions. He said I'd been thorough and helpful. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to school. The Saturday after I gave my statement, I went to the coffee shop. I don't know why. Habit, probably. The body going where it goes. The muscle memory of 12 years of Saturday mornings. I walked in and the smell was the same. The same particular combination of coffee and something slightly vanilla that I've never identified but have always known as the smell of that specific place. And I went to the counter and I ordered 2 oat lattes, one with an extra shot, one without. I was in the middle of paying before I registered what I'd done. I thought about saying, actually, just one. I didn't. I took both to the corner table. I sat there with 2 lattes and I went through 12 years. Not the facts. I had been going through the facts for 2 weeks. I went through the feeling of them. The Saturday in February, year 4, when I was sick. Properly sick. The kind where moving is too much effort. And I texted Claire to say I wasn't going to make it that morning, and she replied 40 minutes later with a knock on my door. She was carrying 3 different kinds of soup in a paper bag. I didn't know which one you'd want, she said, so I got all of them. She stayed for 2 hours. She watched a film with me and didn't talk through it, which is a quality I value enormously in a person. She took the empty soup containers when she left. She texted me the next day to ask if the second soup had been better than the first one. The second soup had been better than the first one. She was right. The wedding, year 6. We'd been given a postcode and an address that turned out to be wrong. Sat-nav taking us to an industrial estate 45 minutes from the actual venue. Both of us in dresses and good shoes, completely lost in a way that kept getting funnier the longer it went on. Until we were laughing so hard, Claire had to pull over because she couldn't see properly. We arrived an hour and 20 minutes late. The bride thought it was one of the funniest things she'd ever heard. I'm not sure it was, objectively, that funny, but I'm not sure anything has ever made me laugh that hard either. Year 7. My relationship ending. Not dramatically, not in any single event. Just the slow accumulation of incompatibility that eventually becomes impossible to argue with. I called Claire at 11 at night on a Thursday. She answered in 3 rings. She said, "Tell me." I told her. She didn't offer solutions or perspectives or silver linings. She said the right things at the right moments, and the right things were sometimes just, yeah. Sometimes just, I know. 2 hours on the phone. When we hung up, I felt less like I was underwater. Year 9. My father in hospital for a week. A procedure that went well, but the waiting was not well. The waiting was 5 days of sitting in a particular waiting area with chairs that weren't designed for long stays, and lighting that was the specific beige of institutional optimism. Claire appeared on day 2. No call beforehand. She sent a text that said, "On my way. What do you want from the vending machine?" She stayed for 2 days. She talked to my mother in the way that my mother finds easy to be talked to. She played cards with my father when he was well enough. She drove me home on the second night because I shouldn't have been driving, and she made tea when we got there, and she went through the fridge and identified what needed to be used up and made something with it that was better than it had any right to be. She slept on my sofa and left in the morning while I was in the shower. Just a note on the kitchen table. "He's going to be fine. Call me." All of this was real. I know it was real. I'm not questioning whether it was real. I would not know how to question it. And here's the thing, I was sitting with at the corner table with 2 lattes, one of them going cold. It was real, and she did not tell me the truth about herself for 12 years. Both of these things are true. Both of these things are completely and exactly true, and I cannot make them not both true. I teach my students this. A text can hold contradictions. A text does not collapse just because 2 things within it seem incompatible. I stand in front of teenagers and ask them to sit with that complexity and not resolve it prematurely. I was sitting at the corner table applying it to my own life, and it was considerably harder to do it there. I thought about her looking out the window in October. "Anywhere good?" I'd said. "Not particularly," she'd said. She was carrying 12 years of a particular weight, and she said not particularly, and I let it go, and that was trust. And it was also, maybe, something I didn't look at closely enough. I've been circling around this specific question for weeks, and I'm still not sure I've answered it. Whether there were moments I should have pressed and didn't, whether the places she never took me, the things she never explained, the family situation that was complicated, whether trusting her with those things was the right thing, or whether it was just what I was comfortable doing, because it was easier than asking. I think it was both. I think it was trust and it was comfort in equal measure, and I don't know how to fully separate them. The second latte went cold. I didn't send it back. I drank mine, and I sat in Claire's absence and I said her name once, quietly, the name she'd given me, the one that is apparently not hers, but is the only one I have. I said it to the empty chair, and the cold latte, and the corner table, and the flickering light in the window across the street. Then I put my coat on, and I walked home. A week later, the follow-up questions came. 3 of them, via email. Procedural, specific, one about a location I'd mentioned, and one about a time frame, and one asking me to confirm a detail I'd included in my statement. I confirmed them. I heard nothing after that. I don't know what the confirmation meant or what it led to. I am not entitled to know, and I have accepted this, more or less, on most days. I went to work. I taught my classes. I had a conversation with my sister on the phone in which I was more present than I'd been in weeks because I'd decided, consciously, to be present, to put the other things somewhere else for an hour and just talk to my sister, who had things going on in her own life and wanted to tell me about them. I listened the way Claire taught me to listen, completely, not waiting to speak, actually there. I don't think my sister noticed anything different about me. I think I sounded like myself. I was trying to. On a Tuesday evening, roughly 3 months after the messages stopped, I was at home making dinner, phone on the counter, face up. I'd gotten out of the habit of turning it face down since there was no longer a reason to monitor it. I was doing something with onions and not thinking about anything in particular when the notification came through. Not a call, not a text. One of those apps I'd downloaded years ago and never really used, the kind that feels more private than a regular message. I put the knife down, I opened it. One line, no name. I'm okay. I'm sorry. I hope someday I can tell you the rest. Sent from an account I'd never seen, created 8 minutes ago. I put the phone down on the counter. I finished the onions. I finished making dinner. I served it into a bowl. I sat at the kitchen table. I ate. 20 minutes later, I picked up the phone and went back to the app. The account was gone. Already. Deleted or suspended or whatever happens to an account that was only ever meant to exist for the length of one message. But I know the way I know her coffee order and the watering schedule and the rhythm of her Saturday arrivals. I know because the apology sounds like her, that specific, direct, unqualified sorry. And I know because she found a way to reach me that was private enough to be safe and personal enough to be real. I know because she wrote, I hope someday, which is not the same as maybe and is not the same as if I can. Someday is a specific kind of hope. It's the kind you hold when you're not sure about the when, but you're sure about the wanting. I'm okay. Okay. I read the word several times. She is alive, and she is functioning, and she is thinking about me. I cannot do anything with this. I know that. I sat with not being able to do anything with it, and I tried to understand that sitting with something is a form of holding it, and that holding it is enough for now. The postcard arrived 6 weeks after that. In my school mailbox, which is specific, not my home address, not a general delivery. My school. The address written in her handwriting, which I recognized the way you recognize someone's handwriting after years of birthday cards and notes left on kitchen tables. No return address. The postmark too smudged to read. My name on the front. On the back, 3 words. Still okay. Still sorry. Still hoping. I held it for a long time standing in the corridor outside the staff room with teachers moving past me on their way to morning briefing. Someone said, "All right?" And I said, "Fine, thank you," and put the postcard in my coat pocket. I taught 3 classes. I had a meeting. I drove home. I put the postcard on the kitchen table and I looked at it for a while. I carried it in my coat pocket for 2 weeks. Not because I forgot to do anything else with it, because it felt right to have it there. Close. The way you carry things that are both heavy and important. Then I moved it somewhere more deliberate. The flat box on my bookshelf, where I keep things I'm not ready to file but can't lose. The card my father sent when I got my teaching post. A photograph from the wedding we arrived late to. The bride laughing, Claire laughing, my own face caught mid-sentence. The postcard. Still okay, still sorry, still hoping. That's what I have. That's the full inventory of what I have. I haven't asked the investigators whether they know her real name. I could. It's possible they'd tell me. I've decided not to ask because if she wants me to know it, she'll tell me herself. And I am not going to stop operating on that principle now. It would be an odd time to start doing things differently. I've been waiting for Claire to give me what she's ready to give for 12 years. I'm going to keep waiting. I know how this sounds, by the way. I know how it sounds to say, my best friend of 12 years withheld her entire identity and a significant and dangerous history, and I'm just going to wait for her to be ready to talk about it. I know. But here's the thing. The waiting was never passivity. It was never me not noticing. It was a choice I made, repeatedly, because I knew her, the real her, the one who shows up with 3 kinds of soup and sits on the phone for 2 hours and names her plants and introduces them to you so you'll love them too. I knew that person. That person is not constructed. That person is as real as the name she was born with, and more real probably than the name she was given in a relocation office by someone who didn't know her, who would never know her the way I do. Whatever her name is, she is Claire. She will always be Claire to me. I don't mean that as denial. I mean it as the most accurate thing I can say. A few weeks ago, I drove to the grocery store on a Tuesday, our spot, 2nd row, left side, near the cart return. I parked there without planning to and sat for a few minutes. The cart return where it always was. The flickering light above the entrance, still flickering, still unfixed. The same building, the same car park, the same fluorescent light doing its thing on the right side. I got out of the car. I went in. I bought what I needed. I walked the cart back to the cart return, which is not something I ever do. I'm someone who leaves it in the nearest bay and moves on. I walked it all the way back. I said in my head, there. That's the only exercise I've gotten all week. And then I felt foolish and also not foolish at all. This past Saturday, I went to the coffee shop. I hadn't been for 3 weeks, which is the longest I've gone in 6 years. I walked in. The same vanilla and coffee smell. The same corner table open, which felt meaningful in a way I'm not going to read too much into. The same staff behind the counter, and when I gave my order, 1 oat latte, extra shot, the person at the till looked at me for a moment and then made 2. 1 with an extra shot, 1 without. He slid them both across the counter without a word. He'd never known our names. He knew the order. He remembered what the order was supposed to be. I took both cups to the corner table. I sat down. I looked at the chair across from me. The light in the cafe was doing what it does on Saturday mornings when it's full. That particular warmth that doesn't have much to do with actual sunlight, but feels like it. I put Claire's latte in front of her chair. I drank mine. She's not coming. I know she's not coming. I'm not waiting for her to walk through the door 8 to 12 minutes late with a library book and no jacket. That is not what this is. But some habits are how you hold on to something while you're still figuring out how to hold it differently. I haven't figured it out yet. The still hoping on the postcard? I think that's true for both of us, in different directions, toward different things. She's hoping for someday, and I'm hoping for it too, and neither of us know what shape it takes when it arrives. I'm being patient with myself about it. The second latte went cold. I didn't send it back.